Shalom, shalom, shalom. Good morning to you all. A good Sabbath for Parsha Har. This is the 32nd of the weeks of the Torah cycle that we read every year. This is the sixth, beginning of the sixth week of the season of counting the Omer that we do every year. We have 2 more weeks, this sixth week and then all the seventh week. And then we have that special day known to most Western people as the Feast of Weeks. We endearingly call it, as the Torah calls it, Shavuot. So here we are. Good morning to you. Welcome. Please let us know you're here. Let us know where you're viewing from. We're showing you a little different look today. We're in a different part of the campus at Biblical Lifestyle Center in Texarkana because we've been having some internet feed problems. Hopefully those will be resolved. If not, you'll know it when it happens. The internet will just cut out and we'll be frozen in time and space. But hopefully we'll be able to get more of our discussions in this morning. I want to talk to you about what I call our view from the first mountaintop. We are at Mount Sinai. And so the first words of our Parsha this week, the Holy One spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai. And so we're seeing that we're going to get a mountaintop view, a vision of our future, a vision of our destiny, a vision of what the Holy One has in store for us, why He delivered us from our bondages, why He brought us this far, why He is giving us the Torah, why He is teaching us how to live lives in such a way as to infuse Kedusha, the very energy of the heavenly realms, into our earthly spheres of influence. He is going to explain a little bit of that. He's going to open our eyes. He's going to draw back a curtain. He's going to show us what the future holds and what the land that He's taking us to it consists of, and how it is different and will be caused to remain different than any other place on the face of the earth. Let me pause just a second to make sure I'm still going here. All right, I'm going to try to do one thing, and then hopefully we'll see what's happening. Okay, I'm not going to be able to do that. All right, well, let's go right ahead. I'll talk to you about this. This is the next to last Sabbath of our annual journey through the book of Leviticus, actually called Sefer Vayikra, the scroll, the writtenness of the calling of the Holy One upon our lives. That's what this book of Leviticus is. This is, depending on how we choose to look at it, what I've been describing to you as the ultimate extreme bridal makeover, which the book of Leviticus is. That phase of our divine romance and our divine calling and mission is going to either be wrapping up, as some people may see it, or is going to be ramping up. And I believe it's ramping up. I believe it's going to get more physical. It's more tangible, more real, and more functional. So that's what we're looking at now. The question becomes, as we get really close to the end of Sefer Vayikra, for English speakers, the book of Leviticus, as we get closer to the conclusion of this book, this scroll, the question is, how is it going to end? How is it going to conclude? And I think you have already learned by virtue of our discussions heretofore that a book of Torah never really ends. It merely comes to a threshold, and you pass through that threshold to go to the next book of Torah. And even when you get to the end, Sefer Devarim, at the end of the year, and we get through the book of Deuteronomy, as it's called by Western speakers, you get to that at the end of the year, even yet we don't end our studies. We pierce the veil. We go through into another level, another deeper level of the Torah, beginning again with Bereshit, or the book of Genesis as it's known to Westerners. So how will Sefer Vayikra, I'll use the term conclude, or bring us to a threshold? Here's the summary. We've all been gloriously redeemed from bondage. I hope that's your story. I hope that's your testimony. But that is where we're supposed to be right now. We're supposed to realize, each one of us, that the Creator of the universe has put His eye upon us. He's put his heart, set his heart upon us. He set his touch upon us, and we have been touched by him and gloriously redeemed from our bondages. Not only have we been gloriously redeemed just so we could be redeemed, though, he's given us the story of all stories, the epic tale of all epic tales, the glorious testimony of all testimonies, the drama of all dramas to tell and to show and to live out before the world. So he's given us a mission and a calling. He's deploying us now. He brought us out of one place to deploy us in another place. And we'll talk a lot about the place he's called to deploy us. But we have been in the process to get us ready for our deployment. He has taken us into his own chambers. He's raised us up. We've gone through the veil or through the portal of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, as Torah calls it, the tent. As we've gone through this tent and through this passageway into the chambers of the king. And therefore we have been constituted as courtiers who are able to be in and flow in and out of the heavenly courtroom. The things that were seen by Isaiah in chapter 6 of his prophecy are seen by John in the book of Revelation, particularly chapters 4 and 5. We are now in that realm. We have the portal of the passageway to go through our meditations on the tabernacle. And so he has constituted us as courtiers in his beauty realm. We are able to access his beauty realm. We're able to be inspired and empowered by his beauty realm. We are able to be infused with the very energy, the Kedusha is what I call the holiness, as it's called in English, but what a strange way of looking at this. This is the actual energy that causes the four living creatures to sing holy, holy, holy. This is the energy infusion that causes the 24 elders to fall down on their faces and cast their crowns and cry out, "Worthy, worthy is the Lamb, he who was slain." This is the one who says, inspired Isaiah, the energy of heaven, and inspired Isaiah with the pillars shaking in the temple, and saying, "Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips." This is Kedusha, and we are called to be able to be courtiers in the beauty realm, in the place of his Kedusha, and then to absorb it, to embrace it, to begin to radiate with it, and then when we go back into deployment phase, when we go back into our normal world and spheres of influence, then to be able to radiate that Kedusha and infuse it into every environment, every situation, every sphere, every transaction, every conversation, every interaction we have with man, with animal, with the created realm. So, we have been trained while we're here at Sinai, at this mountain we're looking from. So we've been trained as ambassadors of a great king, the great king of all kings. And we are ambassadors of his kingship, his kingdom, and we're responsible as that to steward and then to strategically emit, properly dosing the Kedusha energy we've received in his beauty realm outward into proper doses as we spread his essential message of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. And we proclaim, we declare that wherever our feet may tread, wherever our voice may carry, wherever the impact of our presence may be felt. And now we have been redeemed. We have been given a story to tell, a drama to act out. We have been trained as ambassadors of the Holy Kingdom. We have been infused with Kedusha. We have been given the message and the strategies for delivering the message of peace on earth, goodwill toward men, and now it is time to go and change the world. Now it is time for us to prepare for impact. Not the impact we will receive, the impact we will give to the world. As we get this season of transition, therefore, as we're getting ready to change our focus from what we're receiving to what we're going to be giving, we are, I call it shifting wallpaper. And that wallpaper around us, the things that we're seeing around us, the vision, the geography, the coordinates we're at, those things are going to change our latitude, our longitude, and also all the events, the activities, the people will change that are around us, that will be introduced to so many more cultures and people as we're going. But this is going to all change our worldview. What should really focus our worldview, however, is this vision we're having from Mount Sinai. And the Holy One spoke to Moshe from Mount Sinai. So this vision from Sinai is going to color everything that we do as we see everything else in the world, as all the peoples, the cultures, the nations, the behaviors, the problems of the world begin to come into our sphere of influence, into our wallpaper scenario. Then we are supposed to bring forth into it, release into it, the vision that we have from Mount Sinai. So we're looking from Mount Sinai and we're looking eastward. Just imagine that you've been caught up on a mountaintop. Maybe if you're like me, you don't know if you could really climb to the top of a mountaintop at your age or physical state of health or conditioning. Perhaps you would like to be dropped by a helicopter, but however you got to the mountaintop, I want you to imagine you're on the mountaintop and you turn and someone points you eastward and you look down along the scenarios, all the scenery that you might see, all the way, and you can imagine that you're seeing all the way to the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, the passageway. You're seeing the roadways, the paths you could take, the diversions you could make, the different routes you could take. And you're also seeing just a glimmer of hope on the other end of the spectrum of where Eretz Yisrael is. I do this every time I go to a beach somewhere. I get to the water's edge and I stand or I sit at the water's edge or maybe let the waters lap up against my legs as I stand there. And I look out and I say, on the other end of this water, somewhere on the other end of this water, is Eretz Yisrael. If I could walk far enough, if I could swim far enough, if I could get in a boat and be carried far enough, out there is Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. So our focus is shifting as we're moving, as we're getting above the surface level of day-to-day activities, ordinary problems of life, and we're looking at a higher vision, a bigger perspective. Now imagine this, that our focus has to shift. Our focus is going to shift this week, as a matter of fact, from where we've been and what we've seen, and what we think we know. All that's going to be sort of blown out of the water by this vision from Mount Sinai. Because where we've been and what we've seen and what we think we know is going to fade into insignificance, beloved, as we get closer to our vision of where we're going, where the Holy One is taking us, where He is deploying us, what He's going to show us both along the way and once we get there, and what we need to learn to survive, to thrive, and most importantly, ultimately, to represent our King effectively in our new deployment environment. From the infatuation, we're being taken on a journey also this time of year from the infatuation of the Shulamite and to the commitment of Ruth, the devoted commitment of Ruth. Now, what I'm saying is that, according to the Torah year, traditionally at least among the Hebrew peoples, every time of year is assigned a certain Megillah, or a certain text. Well, during the Passover season, the beginning of the counting of the Omer, the focus is upon the Song of Solomon and the love, the romance, the passion, the fire of the Shulamite, and her interactions with the king, and how the building of intimacy takes place, and how the building of trust takes place, and how the maturation process occurs through the Song of Solomon. Well, that has been our focus, but we're about to shift focuses. And our focus is to look toward the land of Israel and be more pragmatic about things. We're still going to be passionate. We'll still be full of love, full of joy, full of hope, full of admiration for our king and our bridegroom. However, the focus will now change to adopting appropriate behaviors that impact the land and our world in that environment. So let's talk about where we've been. God has been telling us He wants us to be holy as He is holy. He wants us to be emanators of Kedusha, radiators of Kedusha energy, the energy of heaven, as He is a radiator and a producer of Kedusha energy. Now this week, the sub-theme is going to be, I'm going to kind of summarize it from a set of verses here, and those verses that I'm going to summarize, I'm going to have to move there up a little bit. There we go. Leviticus 25, 17 through 19. And this little passage, I'll read it, it's a little out of context, but here it is. He's going to tell us not to oppress, do violence against one another. He's going to tell us not to do violence against one another, not to be controversial with one another, but instead to fear, to yareh, to see Him for who He is. Fear God, see Him as who He is. He says, for I am the Holy One, your God. And He says to build, make, form, calls to take shape and functionality, my statutes. and shamar, or treasure, cherish, and then carefully guard my forward-looking, solution-minded decrees, judgments, and asa them and build them, make them into a reality, a form of structure, a government, a nation around them. And then you will dwell in the land. You will dwell, there's something out there for us. Dwell in the land. And he says, lebotech. Lebotok. And you will, and that is often said by faith or something along those lines. But what it really means is you live in the land, but by thorough and radical trust protocols. You're going to learn to live in the land not by virtue of your force, your knowledge, your wisdom base, your doctrines, your theologies. You're going to build your living in the land around thorough, radical trust protocols. Well, that's going to be what he talks about. One of the things he talks about is the Shemitah, the 7-year Sabbath of the land. He's going to talk about the Yovel, the 50-year cycle, made up of 7 Shemitot, 7-year cycles of Sabbaths of the land. And then various different things like how we relate to the poor. That's going to have an effect of living radical trust. We cannot have enough money to ever take care of everybody and still think we're going to be building a nest egg for ourselves. There are protocols of radical, thorough trust that we have to develop dealing with the poor in our land and also dealing with the foreigner in our land. And you will dwell there, lebetok, he says. You will dwell thoroughly radical trust protocols. And that's his theme this week. Let's go back to the context, though. The context of this particular session is the end of Parsha Emor, which came last week. And he did so much in Parsha Emor that he talked to us about. He told us about the different levels of Kedusha. We are not all called to immediately jump into the highest levels of Kedusha. We're to see a strata, a spectrum of levels of Kedusha, the highest level being the Holy One himself in his holy place, and the angels, and the cherubim, and the seraphim. And the lower below that is Moshe, below that. And the third below that is in the high priest. And then below that is the priest under the high priest. And then becomes the Levites, and then becomes Bnei Israel, and then becomes the Ger, the one who is wanting to live among us, but is not really of our natural birth. And then there are the other forms of foreigners, those who are just out there as foreigners, but don't have any desire to be part of us. There's levels of Kedusha that each is called upon to aspire to and begin to implement. So we learned about those. We learned about how sanctifying time, that according to the kingdom, we're supposed to bring Kedusha energy in, and it requires us to look at time differently than the world around us, and to sanctify and observe and use time that we're allotted on earth and the seasons of the year, the seed time and harvest seasons, and do things at those seasons that bring Kedusha into every year, every new moon, every 7 days, every week. We're supposed to do things. And so we had the whole portion of chapter 23 of Leviticus, which was part of last week's studies, in which we discuss all the various different moedim, or special days, special occasions, special infusions of holiness that we're supposed to do at strategic times during the year. And then we finished the Parsha last week with a very shocking narrative. The first narrative we've seen in chapters upon chapters. And this narrative was about what's often called the blasphemer. But he was the Ben Ish Mitzrayim. He was the son of the Egyptian and the son of a Hebrew woman. And we went through much details. I won't go through it. But I will tell you that this narrative is placed in the Torah. Carefully. Watch it, listen to it carefully. This narrative is placed in the Torah to tell us what the challenges to our Kedusha mission will be, and how to recognize those challenges and not surrender to those challenges. The blasphemer, the Ben Ish Mitzrayim that we see, is the epitome of how not to do the Kedusha infusion laws, the Kedusha infusion protocols. And so just so you'll know that. We are now past that first test, or that first unit test, as it were, on the Kedusha protocols. And we learned not to respond out of our flesh to the blasphemer. We waited upon the Holy One to tell us what to do, and we calmly we waited until he gave us the instructions, and then we followed the instructions. So therefore, we passed our first unit test. We're going to have that test over and over again, or a similar test, upgraded test perhaps every single week of the rest of our journey through the wilderness that gets us to the promised land. But we passed our first unit test by learning not to react in our flesh, not to react according to our sense of right and wrong, good and evil, morality and immorality, not to react on the basis of sentiment or sentimentality or sensuality, not to become angry, not to become outraged, not to become incensed, not to become in any way just repugnant, repulsed by what we see. We learn instead just to do what the Father says to do. So we have finished that. Now we're get to the last words. The last words of Parshat Emor were, "And they took outside the camp him who had cursed, who had kalaled this man, this Ben Ish Mitzri. They took him out and they heaped up or piled up stones unto him." Now, I'm not going to get into details in this week about the fact that it doesn't actually say they threw the stones. It just says they heaped and piled up stones according to the Hebrew verbs that were used. And then Bnei Israel did and accomplished and wrought as the Holy One instructed Moshe. And that's where we ended last week. That's where the parsha ended. Remember, again, the blasphemer narrative is our warning sign, our caution, our text, proof text that we should follow and watch out for. We're not to become Ben Ish Mitzri. We're not to behave as Moshe did back in Exodus chapter 2 and get all angry, get all self-righteous, strike someone, get into controversies. We're not supposed to do the things that they did. So next up, what's next? What's next is we turn our eyes toward the land of the patriarchs. We turn our eyes toward home. Home. There is a home. We are not just wanderers upon the face of the earth. We are not just hopeless travelers. I remember when I was first met Yeshua, and there were some old folk songs that were taught. So one of the groups that I was with in the Jesus movement was singing a song called "I'm Just a Poor Wayfaring Stranger." Well, here's the truth. No, we have a home. We are not wayfaring strangers. We are deployed advocates. We are deployed, a deployed group of people that has a mission and a purpose and a homeland. So we're going to start focusing upon this very special homeland that he has prepared for us. And I hope you realize that. Bnei Israel, people of Israel, realize this. The land of Israel is not like any other land. And your home is nowhere besides the land of Israel. No matter where you may live, hang your hat. No matter where you may claim a deed of possession to some piece of attractive land, your home is in Israel. And that home in Israel is calling to you. It has a divine connection with your spirit, and that your spirit belongs there. So eventually, somewhere down the road, there's a hope in your spirit that you will be able to make Eretz Israel, to the place where Jerusalem sits, a beautiful jewel in the midst of it. I want to read to you the English translation, common English translation of the national anthem of Israel, modern state of Israel for that matter, Hatikvah. And it goes like this: "As long as within our hearts the Jewish soul sings, as long as forward toward the east to Zion looks the eye, our hope is not yet lost." The hope thousands of years old to be a free people in our land, in the land of Zion and Jerusalem. Oh, beloved, this is the beautiful thing. We are not just saved from bondage. We're not just redeemed to live as wayfaring strangers upon the earth. No, we are given a homeland, and we have a hope of that homeland in our spirits. And now here's the other truth. As goes this hope in the hearts of Bnei Israel, the people of the living God, the people of the covenant, as goes this hope for the land in the hearts of Bnei Israel, so goes the species of humankind. To the extent we lose that hope, or it gets watered down or adulterated with other hopes, desires, dreams, then humankind suffers, because it is the mission we have to bring the hope to the rest of the world through the Kedusha energy. Now, our connection with the land And the beauty and the magnificence of the land called Israel is not just history, although there is such a tremendous historical basis for it. It's impossible to deny, but yet people still try to deny the historical basis. Oh, but it's not just history that connects us to the land and calls it to be our home. It's not even just prophecy, although there are multitudes of prophecies, both in the realm of the Messianic world and of the prophets and of the Torah itself. All through it is the prophecy of what's going to happen in the physical confines of that land. Where will Yeshua reign? Verse millennial reign. That's future prophecy. Where will Israel return from all the nations? That's the prophecy of the Torah that Moshe gave us in the song. All these things, not just history, not just prophecy, is something more that makes the land of Israel holy. Makes it kadosh, makes it radiate with kedusha energy. Both the soil and the atmosphere there, both the soil and physical dirt and the atmosphere of the air and the ecosystem there are something otherworldly, really, really special beyond our imagination. And so as goes Eretz Yisrael, as goes the land of Israel, so goes the whole of creation. If Eretz Yisrael prospers and is at peace, so the whole of creation will be. If Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is at war, if it is in stress, and if it's wandering from its root, so will the whole of creation be. This is the reality. As goes Jerusalem, not only as goes Eretz Yisrael, goes the whole of creation, but as goes Jerusalem, so go both Bnei Israel, the people of Israel, and the land of Israel. So all these things are connected. All these things are real. So here we stand at Sinai, looking east, and we're about to focus our discussions from Bahar on what to do once we establish a presence in this homeland, this beautiful land of the patriarchs and the land of the destiny of our future, still 100 or so, actually several hundred miles to our east as we have this discussion. The Holy One plans to finish what he started in Egypt and to do so in style. He plans to do so by escorting us to and then entrusting into our hands of stewardship that beautiful land bridge that connects the three major continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa. That is the land of Israel. It's a land bridge that connects three continents. No wonder it's so strategic and important. Oh, but it's more than just its geography. It is the essence of the Holy One's connection with it. The Holy One wants us to see that the most strategic of all parcels of real estate on the planet Earth has a beachhead, or is designed to be a beachhead from which he can launch a campaign of Kedusha infusion and goodwill toward men testimony. A campaign that will offer healing and offer restoration to every hill and valley, desert and river, island and timber ridge, and every person and bloodline on the face of the earth. It's called a land flowing with milk and honey. The Holy One called it that when he had this conversation with Moshe, and he calls it that many times thereafter. A land flowing with milk and honey. Both two elements. It flows with milk and it flows with honey. Now, there are two levels of food, two levels in which a baby learns. First, he learns to drink milk, and then they learn to eat some more substantive, and that we're going to characterize that as honey. So every kingdom must have a homeland, and Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is that for us. Our identities, beloved, our mission, our destinies, all of them, our bloodlines are all inextricably tied up with the land of Israel. And when the Holy One apprehended Moshe at the burning bush and commissioned him to lead Abraham's seed out of Egyptian bondage, what he promised to Moshe was that he would bring him to a good, and a large, expansive land, a land flowing with milk and honey. That's Exodus 3:8 and repeated in 3:17. So what does it mean to be a land flowing with milk and honey? I need first of all to read to you a little section from the book of Hebrews so that you understand perhaps what this means and how the parallel is to the land. The land of Israel is flowing with milk and flowing with honey. And we don't understand that. We don't understand why it's so precious. Why does it flow with milk, overflow with milk, and overflow with honey? Well, milk means more than just what flows from the udders of the sheep and the goats. and the cows and the oxen. It is something else. Milk is something else, and so is honey. Honey is not what you think it is if you're thinking in terms of what the bees produce through the hives and the pollen. Honey, in a spiritual sense, the idea that's specified in the Torah, is a davash, is that kind of special honey that's made from the ripe dates, the sweetness of dates. And so the word translated as honey in the original text is generally understood to be a reference to fruit nectar, particularly from dates, but also to some degree from pomegranates and from figs, not that produced by bees. Now, fruit overflows with nectar when the land is especially fertile and is tilled and taken care of, tended and kept well. Now, a land flowing with milk and honey must be a land of extremely fertile soil, well tended, where people live in shalom. Now, from Hebrews chapter 5, I want to give the parallels here. From chapter 5, verses 12 through 14. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, the writer says, you need someone to teach you again the principles, the fundamentals of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk, here's that correlation, and not solid food, which would be the honey. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is but a babe. But solid food, the honey, the davash, the solid food belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason of their senses exercise them to discern both tov v'ra. Now this is the idea that we're going to see developing, is the land of Israel is special because it is a land of both milk, which is there for the novice, that teaches the novice the ways of the Holy One, also is a land flowing in honey, which is flowing in the deeper things, the richer, the things that are more substantive, that teach us to discern and separate between the things that need to be separated from. Well, with that in mind, shall we sing our Baruch Hu? Baruch Hu Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Vayed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Michol Ha'amin V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. Amen. Parsha Bahar begins with these lines. I'll speak it in the Hebrew, and then I'll try to basically translate it as best I can in my own words into English. It starts with these words. Va'adaber Adonai el Moshe Bahar Sinai Lamor. And the Holy One spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai, saying, Dabar el bnei Israel ve'amartu elehem. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ki tavo'u el ha'aretz ani noten lechem. When you come into the land that I am giving them and trusting to them, Veshavtu ha'aretz Shabbat la'Adonai. And then the land, or the earth, will Sabbath a Sabbath unto the Holy One. Leviticus chapter 25, verses 1 and verse 2. And the land, or the earth, ha'aretz, will Sabbath a Sabbath unto the Holy One. What kind of land is the Holy One taking us to? And who does he think we are? That when we come into that land, that very special land, it will do something no other land in the world knows how to do. It will Sabbath a Sabbath unto the Holy One. What an amazing statement. So welcome to the Parsha of Radical Ecosystem Management Protocols. Radical Ecosystem Management Protocols. I told you, as Eretz Yisrael goes, so goes the whole of creation. We must be able to tend Eretz Yisrael, keep and tend it, tend and keep it, according to the protocols of Kedusha, or the rest of creation will suffer. We, not the governments of this world, are responsible for this. Not the elites of this world. Not the economies of this world. Not the institutions of religion in this world. We, the people of the Holy One, the Bnei Israel, the called out ones of the Holy One, are responsible for implementing radical ecosystem management protocols that will bring life and thriving abundance, milk and honey forth from Eretz Israel, and therefore spill it out into the rest of the world. So Parsha Behar consists of 57 verses that introduce the Holy One's plan for restoring first Eretz Israel, then the world, to the state of beauty, fruitfulness, and shalom that he created it for. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of land the Holy One is taking us to. What is Eretz Israel like? And why is it so different? I got to take you back to the call of Abraham. The first words that the Holy One spoke to Abraham in chapter 12, Parsha Lech Lecha. The Holy One said to Abraham, go out for yourself, out of your country, away from your family, and away from your father's house, to, and that marvelous phrase, a land that I will show you. This Eretz Israel is the land he will show us. It is something eye has not seen, nor ear has not heard, nor has entered into the mind or the heart of man what the Holy One is going to make out of Eretz Israel, this special terra firma, the place, the land bridge between the three continents. Also, you need to remember Genesis 13, 14 through 17, the second or third visitation the Holy One had with Abraham. He said, the Holy One said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you, and to your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, or measure it, or determine what it was for and valuable, how it could be most best used, even so will your seed be so calculated. Remember Leviticus last week in Parsha Emor, we read this, 19:23, Leviticus 19:23. When you come into the land, this is again, Tava'u, when we come into the land, the year of Tava'u, when you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, you are to count their fruit as uncircumcised. 3 years it shall be as uncircumcised to you. It was not to be eaten. What kind of land is this? That the trees are treated differently, have to be treated differently. They have to have protocols of Kedusha for trees in the land of Israel. I know people want to apply this to other countries and any fruit trees that they plant, and I don't mind them doing so. I wouldn't say you're doing something wrong, but it's only to bring zealousness into the Bnei Israel, to make them jealous, as it says in the book of Romans. And so also remember Leviticus 25:22 in the discussion of the Moedim, the Holy One, before he talks about Shavuot, which is coming up now, he says, when you reap the harvest of your land, the land again, this Eretz Israel, when you reap the harvest of Israel, Eretz Israel, you are not to wholly reap the corners of your field when you reap, nor are you to gather any gleaning, no second pass through your harvest. You are to leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am the Holy One, your God. Now, this land of Israel is not like most lands you couldn't afford to do that. Most places you could live. You couldn't afford, a farmer could not afford to leave a corner of his field, or just forsake any second pass through the fields. But in Israel, it's going to be so rich, so productive, so valuable, that this mitzvah will be part of the protocols of holiness for the land. So, I want you to also think about Deuteronomy 8, verses 6 through 9. We haven't got there yet in the text of Torah in our cycle this year, but we will get there soon enough. And Moshe is going to say, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, you are to keep the commandments of the Holy One your God, speaking to Bnei Israel, speaking to the children of the covenant. You are to keep the commandments of the Holy One your God, to walk in his ways, and to fear him. For the Holy One your God is bringing you into a good land. a good land, this special Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, a land of brooks of water, he says, a land of fountains or wells, a land of springs that flow out of valleys and hills. Springs usually just flow out of one or the other, but they flow out of valleys, they flow out of hills in the land of Israel, a land of wheat and barley, a land of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and of date honey, the honey from the nectar of the date. A land in which you will eat lachem, food, items of food, good food without scarcity. A land in which you will lack nothing. A land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper. Oh, beloved, beloved, do you understand the calling of the land upon your heart and upon your spirit and upon your life? It has holiness protocols that are programmed into you by the Torah that you are designed to implement in the land of Israel. There is no land like it on the face of the earth, no matter how fertile you think your patch of terra firma may be. The land of Israel is holy and blessed, even as the Sabbath, the seventh day, is holy and blessed. It is not like others. Lands like the Sabbath is not like other days. It cannot be reproduced in America or South Africa or the Philippines or Australia or New Zealand or Europe or Asia or in South America or Canada. It cannot be reproduced anywhere else to the fullness of what it is. It can be copied, it can be emulated, but it cannot be reproduced in fullness. The land of Israel, like the Shabbat, requires observance of appropriate Kedusha and Bracha, holiness and blessing, maintaining protocols. So, welcome to the Kingdom Beachhead Discourse. It will talk about Shemitah, the Sabbath of every 7 years, and this is only applicable technically in the land of Israel. If you want to do it in other lands, it's your business. It's not a commandment, it's not an instruction. The Shemitah has to do with the land of Israel. Second thing it's going to talk about is the Yovel, or the Jubilee, as it's called in English. It's like a Seferet HaOmer, the counting of the Omer protocol, but for the land as opposed to for us as Bnei Israel. We have a 50-day counting from Passover all the way to Pentecost, but the Yovel is a 50-year protocol. And it has special implications for everything. The Yovel affects everything that goes on in the land. I know it doesn't seem like it to you right now, but this is the way the Holy One is set up. These are the Kedusha protocols. The third thing that's going to be mentioned in this Kingdom Beachhead Discourse of Parshat Bahar are the essential conditions under which we will be given stewardship rights over Israel. We are not given the land with a deed. We are given the land instead with a responsibility of tending and keeping, as Adam and Hava were given the garden. He retains ownership of the land, and he retains the right to determine who will be its tenants and what they will be doing on the land. So he establishes conditions of our stewardship of Eretz Yisrael, and he establishes covenants that run with the land. There are the covenants that cover the transfer of interests in the land. There are what's called the right of redemption that applies in Israel. And it differs depending on where in Israel and in what part of cities or countryside and who is making the transfer as to how the right of redemption works. He tells us what all it's going to be. He also has special provisions as far as caring for the poor among us and the stranger that comes to dwell with us, and caring for them in ways that shock the world but bring about and radiate Kedusha energy into the atmosphere of Eretz Yisrael. Finally, he will have some additional rules of engagement for dealing with the Goyim and the things that the Goyim value, and not valuing and cherishing and getting caught up in the things the Goyim are caught up in. Now, there are different zones of impact that are assigned to us for Kedusha infusion. As I said, our main mission is to take the Kedusha that we get from our interactions with him in the holy beauty realm and then release that strategically according to his instructions on the earth. The first realm or zone of impact that we deal with in this Kedusha realm is the realm of time. the days we actually dwell upon the earth. We are placed upon the earth, and the earth is already in motion. There's cycles already in progress. We're somewhere in the midst of a 7-year cycle and a 50-year cycle. We're in cycles of kingdom perspective mission time. We're somewhere in the seasons of the Moedim, in the seasons of the Shabbat of the Torah cycle. We're somewhere in that when we're born, and we just pick up where we start as soon as we're able to function. So we're also caught up in cycles of the profane agendas of fallen humanity. There are things happening around us, not kingdom motivated, but worldly motivated, that are going on around us. Where we happen to be born in this cycles of time, or live our lives in the cycles of time, is affected to some degree. How we live in those times is affected by what's going on in the fallen, humane, profane agenda world. And then nations in that situation are rising and falling. Cultures are advancing and retreating. Things like that are happening. Cycles are in time. We're called to bring Kedusha into every cycle of time in which we come in contact. The second realm, beyond time, which we're called to bring a Kedusha infusion or holiness into, is space, physical, geographical space. The Holy One says it this way: everywhere the sole of your feet shall tread. Okay? So I would also say everywhere your scent, your fragrance, your aroma is left or wafts. Everywhere your voice travels, the sound of your unique voice travels. Everywhere your written words or the story of your actions or the impact of your actions travels, this is the space we are called to interact with. There are geographical locations. Mine right now, I'm living in Texarkana, Texas, in the North American continent, in the nation of the United States, but I go other places too. And so everywhere the sole of our foot travels, this is a space we're called to infuse holiness into. We don't take vacations the way the world takes vacations. We don't take road trips the way the world takes road trips. We're all called, wherever we go, wherever we're called to go, wherever we set our foot, wherever we drive, wherever we talk, wherever we live, we are to bring an infusion of Kedusha. And that's our mission. That's our purpose, not to entertain ourselves or recreate, or have any form of R&R. We will hopefully enjoy that as well, but that's not our main mission. Also, the third area, beyond time, which we're supposed to sanctify, and space we're supposed to sanctify and infuse Kedusha into, are the ecosystem species with which we interact. This morning I saw 4 deer come into my backyard and just enjoy the time there. They ate a little bit, they looked around, they just enjoyed the shade of the trees, and I was interacting in that way with these ecosystems, the species, the deer. Same thing with rabbits and squirrels. Some are more. It's more difficult whenever predators come into my play. But we are to interact with an impact with Kedusha, the ecosystem species that we interact with. And fourthly, we have human interaction. The realm of human interaction is the other zone of impact we're called to introduce Kedusha into. As human interaction in all its levels, all of its spheres, from marketplace to marriage and home life, to neighborhood interactions, to education system, institution interactions, to internet interactions, all levels of interaction, and all medium of those medium of connectivity. We're supposed to infuse holiness into all those things. No message is to be sent. No action is to be taken. No word is to be spoken. No facial expression is to be given. No body language is to be exhibited, except for to bring honor and glory to the King of Heaven and his agenda of bringing Kedusha into the world. But speaking of sanctifying time, we are introduced to something that I call the year of Ki Tavo'u, the year of our coming into the land. Now, some say we came into the land under Joshua on 10 Nisan or Aviv, the 10th day of the first biblical month of 1273 BCE. That's the traditional left. There's others who say we crossed the Jordan at flood stage and entered the land on 10 Nisan Aviv in 1250 BCE. Now the key is, the real factor is, it was 1,200 and something years ago. No, excuse me, 3,200 and something years ago. But no man alive knows exactly what the day is. We don't know what the year of Ki Tavo'u was, but we know close to what it was. And we are assigning time, we're gauging time and cycles of time based upon the year of Ki Tavo'u. On our year of Ki Tavo'u, A series of recurring 7-year and 50-year cycles that will last forever was commenced. Some would say it was after the settling of the land and all the division of the land, and all the tribes took up their habitations. Now, I'm not going to try to argue with you theology or which one it is. It really doesn't matter. We're called to be where we're called to be. We'll do what we're called to do, but we are called to infuse holiness wherever we go. Let's talk about the Shemitah, a Sabbath. The Shemitah is the word that's usually used for the 7-year Sabbath when we do not do certain things. It says for 6 years, the Holy One's instructions are that for 6 years, we are to sow our field. Tizra Sadeka, we are to sow in our field. Tizmur Karmeka, we are to prune our vines. We are Asaftu et Tabu. We're to gather the produce of our land. 6 years. But on the 7th year, it's different. On the 7th year, once we have our year of Ki Tava'u, and we begin the 7-year cycles in the land of promise, in those years, the 7th year protocols are that it is a Shabbat, Shabbaton Ladonai. It is a holiest of all, completeness of all, the Sabbath of Sabbaths to the Holy One. It is very important to Him that we learn to observe it, to get as close as we can to it. If we don't know the exact date, we get as close as we can to it. We don't give up because we can't know the exact date. We try to be as strength, but we don't argue that point with other people and get into fights over when the Shabbaton Ladonai is. Secondly, not only is it Shabbat Shabbaton Ladonai, it is Shabbat La'aretz. It is not just a very special thing for the Holy One, of the Holy One. It is a special thing for the land. If we're going to make the land be its best, to produce milk and honey in such a way that it overflows into the rest of the world, we must do this for the sake of the land. And it is fertile enough, and it is productive enough with the blessing and the holiness of the Holy One upon it to provide for us all we need, even if we do not seed our field, prune our vineyard, or gather in the produce yield of the land. So neither are we to, on the 7th year, neither are we to sow our field nor prune our vineyard. And if something volunteers from the vine or something volunteers from the land and the crops, areas where we've grown crops before, we're not to harvest anything other than on a day-by-day, day's portion basis. And we're to leave the rest of it for the foreigner, for the servant, for the livestock, and for the animals. We're to trust that the Holy One, this is radical trust, to trust that the Holy One will provide for us day by day. Once every 7 years, we just totally trust in Him rather than our own labor. We should have learned it already with regard to every week on the Sabbath of the 7th-day Sabbath, but we'll learn it with regard to years, and it will be a more radical strategy. The secret. What is the secret to being able to do this? How could you possibly trust the Holy One enough to not sow in a area, and not to prune your vines, and not to harvest that which is there and ready and might go to waste if you don't harvest it? How could you trust the Holy One to do so? Well, the secret is something called bitachon in Hebrew. In English, it's usually translated as trust. Some might even translate it as belief. But boy, it goes so far beyond those phrases. Bitachon, and we are to live our lives, we're to live in the Holy Land, leb betoch. We are to live according to this bitachon, according to the idea that we have radical trust and protocols that go with radical trust in order to live in the land. Bitachon is a powerful sense, Kedusha-infused optimism. Confidence based upon not reason or experience or logic, but on emunah. The trust, the faith that we have in the goodness of the Holy One and His plan and His ways and how He always brings about good in everything He does. So bitachon is a product of emunah. We know that God is good. We know that He is in charge and can bring about good, and therefore we put aside fear and worry and fret and jealousy and competition. Those things just make no sense in the environment of bitachon. We're about out of time, so I want to just basically talk to you about one other factor, and that is dealing with the poor. In the land, we will deal with the poor and the foreigner, and we are not to deal with the poor and the foreigner according to governmental aid programs. The government is not responsible. Anything the government touches, as long as it is disconnected from the Torah, is going to be a destructive force. That is one of the keys you need to learn about trusting governments. We don't trust government, you trust the Holy One. And the Holy One entrusts the poor to us, to you and to me, to the sons and daughters of the covenant. And he gives us protocols we're supposed to follow to make sure the poor do not starve, do not die. We're not supposed to make them equal to us. They are however they are designed. If the Holy One has given their lot in life to be lesser or more than a person, we're not to be jealous of the rich, nor particularly oversensitive to the poor. We are, however, to recognize need and to deal with need as we can deal with it and as the Holy One allows us to do so. It is our responsibility not to delegate it to institutions, charitable organizations, churches, synagogues, or the government of all things. So it is an essential part of the covenant redemptive plan, the grand redemptive plan, for us to have a way of observing people's situations and need, and responsibly and respectfully addressing those needs as the Holy One leads and guides us to do. Well, that is a part of the Kedusha releasing protocols in the land. I think if we start with that process, I think Yeshua would have had to start with that process and go forward. And we can deal with the rest of the protocols of Kedusha as they come around. But every single day, every single year, every single week, every single moment, to be looking and aware of the foreigner and the poor. We could also add the widow and the fatherless. Well, it's time to say goodbye for this week. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation and been moved and inspired by it, perhaps a little challenged by it. But whatever it may be, let me know, or ask me your questions, send me your comments, or just your Shabbat Shaloms. Let me know where you are, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. May the Holy One be willing. Shabbat Shalom.